Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Hello. Today we have another podcaster on the show. Amy Fritz, who hosts the Untangled Faith podcast, is going to be on today. And Amy is passionate about speaking out against abuse and toxic work environments, mainly because her husband worked in a very toxic work environment for the Lampo Group, which otherwise is known as the Dave Ramsey Solutions or Ramsey Solutions. She and her husband live in Nashville, and she found herself reluctantly on a journey as a spouse of somebody who worked in a toxic work environment. And because of the nature of the concept of the crazy spouse, or crazy wife, I should say, which we'll go into the episode in more detail, she ended up getting roped into a very toxic situation herself, and therefore spoke out about it, became a whistleblower, and has a podcast called Untitled Faith that was sort of born out of that, and another church experience that she had that we'll ask her about as well. But anyway, today, just want to introduce you to Amy Fritz. If you've not heard of her before, introduce you to her podcast. Highly recommend that you check it out. And Amy is very passionate about helping the truth be exposed and helping set people free from toxic work environments and faith-based spaces to find places of flourishing that are emotionally healthy and healing. So in this emotionally healthy emphasis we're doing in our series right now, I thought it would be great to have Amy on the show to share her own narrative, her own perspective, so you can hear it straight from her. But of course, she goes into way more detail in her own podcast. So I definitely want to make sure you go there. Amy and I are going to both be at Podcast Movement in Denver in August. So if you're also a podcast host or involved in the podcasting industry, would love to meet you. We'll both be there. And anyway, today I'm just very delighted to have on the show Amy Fritz. Hello, Amy, and a very warm welcome to the A World of Difference podcast today.
Thank you, Lori. It is so good to be here. You've been on my podcast, so it's my turn.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. I love how podcast hosts can support each other. And for us, we have so much alignment in the type of podcasting that we do. So trying to make a difference, trying to speak about things that sometimes people don't want to talk about, but the truth sets us all free. So we're going to dig into some good stuff today. And I'm really glad that you're here. You have such a compelling reason why you started your podcast. And I know that probably some of the people that listen to this podcast also listen to yours. There's a little bit of a crossover in the concentric circles there. But I kind of just want to give you a chance to sort of start off by letting us know, who are you? Why did you start this podcast? And even a little bit of the background of what led you to get it going.
Yeah. I think you're right about our mutual listeners. Probably if you were to look up either of our podcasts on like Apple, where it'd say, if you like this podcast, you might like this one, it would probably point to the other one. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I started my podcast in spring of 2021. I'd been thinking about it for a while, and the name of my podcast is Untangled Faith, and I provide community and anti-gaslighting and encouragement for people that have had hard experiences with their faith, like in faith communities. Um, I say, this is a place for people that have been discouraged or disillusioned in their faith journey, people that love Jesus. They are not done with Jesus, but they're done with some of these trappings that they have realized are not Jesus. And so I had been I had for quite a while felt compelled to talk about some things that were broken in the church. Sort of the ways that the Willow Creekification of churches made me feel a little, I just made up that word.
I love that word. That is a word now. Yeah.
That, we turned it into like this sort of business thing, and we were applying all these business principles to church, which can be fine, but sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
And so I'd sort of been thinking about that for a while. Had some weird experiences with some really unhealthy pastors, a pastor that we just felt like uncomfortable with, and then realized like when things were melting down with him that the reason why we really weren't enjoying him so much is that he actually was plagiarizing every word of every sermon he preached. And one of his main sources was Mark Driscoll, whom I was not a fan of.
Of all the people to plagiarize.
It only makes sense that I would leave some of these sermons going, why does he sound angry? And what is his problem? Yeah, he was doing sort of a dramatic reading of other people's sermons every single week.
Wow.
Including their personal stories.
Ew. Wow.
So he didn't just use like the outlines of their sermons, but if they had a really funny story or a really powerful personal story, he shared it as his own.
Wow.
I don't recommend.
Yeah.
Feel like
the whole charlatan pastor thing is just way more common than it should be.
Yeah. And so that was like, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the problem of plagiarism in church. I wrote in my blog. I did some things that way. But around the same time, I was starting to feel like this tension because in 2012, our family had moved to like the capital of the evangelical industrial complex, Nashville. And my husband was working for a high-profile Christian leader, for Dave Ramsey, who whole empire was about selling things to Christians, and he was partnering with people that I felt uncomfortable with. And the more I was paying attention to the things Dave was saying and the way he was, I started to feel like, I don't know. I was feeling like if I keep talking about unhealthy things, what happens to my husband's job? And and I was having this cognitive dissonance that says, Amy, your paycheck is coming from somebody that is probably could easily be added in this list of problematic things that you're working through. But I was dealing with betrayal blindness that was saying, everybody is a little narcissist if they lead an organization. And my brain was working overtime for quite a while to keep me from seeing how bad things really were, just to protect us, because seeing how bad it was requires some really hard decisions and paying some pretty big costs. And we weren't ready until my brain was ready, until the Holy Spirit was like, she's ready. They're ready. Nathan and Amy are ready to see this. And so all of those things were sort of, I kind of went silent for a while on talking about things on my website, while dealing with some personal things and kind of reckoning what was happening behind the scenes with my husband's employer. And it was 2019 that things came to a head.
Yeah.
where, you know, there were so many things happening in the evangelical world with high profile leaders in the
Mm-hmm.
recent years leading up to that were just so terrible.
Yeah.
And I just knew, I mean, and I know it was the Holy Spirit that just said, Amy, at some point, you know, you're going to turn on your phone. You're going to get up in the morning, turn on your phone, scroll through the news, and there's going to be an article about your husband's CEO.
Yeah.
And I just knew. It wasn't like this might happen. This is going to happen. It's all
Yeah.
going to come tumbling down. It's not all great. And yeah, I didn't even tell Nathan that at the time. I mean, I shared it with him later, several months later, when things kind of hit a fever pitch of us seeing some really horrible things we had to address, whether we're going to trust them or not, if things were going to work out for us there or not. But yeah, that's sort of
And
all
that's
of
the
this
betrayal
happening.
blindness, right? That's what you're talking.
Yeah.
So, unpack that a little bit more. Betrayal blindness is, the same person who coined the term DARVO, which we talk about a lot on here, which is the whole
Yeah.
deny and attack and reverse victim offender.
Yeah.
Also, kind of coined this term betrayal blindness. How did that look for you? And explain a little bit more about what was going on, the risk that you would take to believe it, and the blindness that you
Yeah.
were somewhere in your
Yeah.
being taking on.
Yeah. Learning about it has given me so much compassion for my past self and for others in the situation of betrayal. I read Jennifer Freed's book where it's called Blind to Betrayal, and she talks about this. And it's just really, really powerful, talking about how our subconscious says, this is dangerous for you to see this. I don't know if you can handle seeing it. So our very self works against us seeing things. And this is a fantastic thing for young children that are experiencing abuse, because their
Mm-hmm.
little psyches would not be able to handle that.
Yeah.
But there are also times it works against us. And so in our case, it was those little red flags that would pop up, red flags, orange flags, all the different colors of flags, where you have to decide, oh, did I actually see that? Is that
Mm-hmm.
actually a problem? And then if I decide it is a real problem, if I actually am allowed to like process it or let myself go there is a cost involved in seeing hard things. And the higher the cost, I think the more your subconscious works against you seeing it.
Yeah.
Um, maybe you have a bunch of like really stressful things going on in your life, maybe with your health or with your marriage or with your kids or something. Um, your subconscious says, we can't do one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
we
Yeah.
we can't. We're gonna like file that away for later,
Uh-huh.
for when things. So for us, it just felt like we couldn't see it because our income was tied to trusting that a place was good.
Yes.
And
So
if we
often like that.
didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and if we, entertain the idea that it wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
we need to get a new income.
Yeah. That's
Uh,
huge.
and this pays our bills. This
Right.
pays for our groceries. This pays for our insurance. And so
Mm-hmm.
I never want to look at somebody and say, why is Lori still there? What is wrong with her? How come
Right.
she can't see it? I have a lot of empathy for the people in those situations where the problematic person or place is providing something that
Mm-hmm.
family really needs. I
Yeah.
have less empathy for the person with a lot of resources and a lot of power in the situation that is also harming somebody else
Right.
while like trying not to see the bad things. It's
Mm-hmm.
complicated. It
Yeah.
is like, and we've all been the bad guys in some ways. And so reckoning with all of the things is really hard. I don't know if I answered all of your questions, but
You
seeing
did.
the
No,
truth
it's so
does
deep.
cost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very complicated. I mean, in your situation, it was a toxic work environment of an employer of a business who is a professing Christian and has Christian products that he sells. In other people's cases, it might be, like a mega church, for example, where
Yeah.
you have employees and you also have volunteers. Volunteers don't necessarily have their money tied in with their income, but their relationships are connected there. I mean, it's
Community.
where,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
they're involved multiple times a week, sometimes volunteering 20 to 40 hours of their time, not being paid, but maybe they are hoping to find a spouse there. Maybe their kids love the youth group or whatever.
And there's some,
All
yes,
of
that's
that.
right. You know,
It's
when your
like
kids
pulling
have found a
Velcro apart.
place,
Yeah,
it's hard to
exactly.
leave.
It's hard
People
to
will
leave.
endure a lot for their
Mm-hmm.
kids if
They
their kids are
will. I
okay.
know.
So yeah,
Yes.
I did make a list as Nathan and I were thinking through, is it time for Nathan to resign from his job? I made a
Mm-hmm.
list of people we could lose, friendships
Yeah.
we could lose.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's not just income, it's
Yeah.
like your community. And
Mm-hmm.
when it's involving a faith organization, oftentimes we tie so many things up in that one place. Like maybe your income's there, all of your friends are there,
Mm-hmm.
your coworkers are all there. All of it are the same place, and so to walk away from that means you lose all the things at once.
Yeah.
And the more power and influence the person or organization has in your community, the higher the
Mm-hmm.
cost it will be for you.
Yeah. So I know that you unpack this on your podcast. So
Yeah.
people, please go back and listen to the Untangled Faith episodes where Amy unpacks this, also with her friend Melissa. But I mean, one of the interesting parts about your story is you were not the employee, but you were a wife of a Ramsey
Yeah.
Solutions employee. And so, how did you sort of first become aware of this toxic work environment created by Dave Ramsey, and what impact did it have on your friend
Yeah.
Melissa Hogan?
It's weird. I mean, some people are probably like, why would she have anything at all to do with her husband's employment? That is a good question.
Yes,
But
that's
that's
the
sort of
question.
how that's how ministries are often set up.
Uh huh.
You hire the one person and you get this package deal for free
Yeah.
as the spouse helper
Hmm.
person. This happens in churches all the time,
Yep.
whether and oftentimes it's well-meaning. It isn't
Hmm.
like necessarily a nefarious thing. Like it's problematic if there's an assumption that you're just going to get like extra work from somebody that isn't actually on the payroll.
Yeah.
But and like the weird thing is with this is not a ministry. Like people think that Dave Ramsey's company is a ministry or like this nonprofit thing. It is neither a ministry or a nonprofit. This is a
Right.
for-profit business that does some ministry type things, but when it comes to like conflict between ministry and profit's going to win
Yeah.
pretty much every time. And that's what we learned. And so when it comes with the Ramsey organization, their legal name is the Lampo Group. I knew the Lampo Group because Dave had put out a book called EntreLeadership, all about how they do business. And I understood that they also interview the spouse. They do a spousal interview, and the explanation in the book was to make sure that the spouse was not married to crazy. Because if the spouse is married to some crazy person, they will distract the employee from their work. It's a drain on them. And so they actually interview the spouse. Now, it is illegal to ask somebody in an employment situation, like in an interview, if they are married,
Hmm.
because you cannot make a decision. You can't, make a hiring decision based on somebody's marital status. But
Yeah.
people volunteer this information. And there's ways to get around it. Like people put that information out there publicly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was interviewed. And I bought in. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't really. I bought into the whole thing. I knew what to say. I knew how to be supportive.
Hmm.
And shortly after Nathan started his job, I took over as like one of the admins of the Facebook group for the Lampo women, people that work there or spouses of people that work there. I planned like events for us. I met new people that were moving to town. I showed them around. I helped connect them to churches. Like this was sort of like this was an unpaid part-time job. I was also expected to like shut down conversation that was negative about the company if it was happening on the Facebook group. Like if people were complaining, this was a big, huge deal, and it would get back to the company and we would be expected to shut it down. I'm not working there. I'm not get a paycheck. So this happened. Yeah. I'm like feeling like all the anxiety all over
Yeah.
again of like having my husband being like, talked to by a board member saying, hey, Amy or the other admin needs to go shut down this conversation. People aren't happy about XYZ, so they better shut it down. Dave's not happy.
Yeah, it's very toxic image management. It's not allowing negative feedback to ever come in. It checks out as to how, the mega church I worked in under Andy Wood, they had ways of doing that too. Yelp reviews, things they would, you'll get fired for gossip. That's also a Dave Ramsey. I don't know where that started, if it started with Bill Gothard or who started this thing.
Sounds, as I'm reading the Bill Gothard stuff, it sounds so similar. But if it's anything that isn't positive, they say that it is gossip, and you are not allowed to share anything that's not positive, except with somebody that they say can solve the problem. And they define that very specifically as somebody in authority. So I could not talk to a peer about a problem. In fact, even spouses are not allowed to raise concerns publicly.
It's such abuse culture, right?
Or privately.
Yeah.
And so like I had a friend who posted something on her personal Facebook page saying that she was concerned about something during COVID. Her husband was fired over it. That same year, right after another spouse was like out in public, said something really benign about how the organization handled some COVID things. And the owner of the company, of this bar that this person was at, this hotel like lounge, went back and reported to Dave that somebody was saying something negative about him. So the employee got fired immediately.
So he has spies everywhere.
Yeah. They told the employees that this person was going to work on their marriage, basically leaving and working on their marriage. And then Dave shared this story in a convocation at Liberty University that you can listen to, that's recorded, and talked about how he fired this person because they married poorly.
It's just unbelievably toxic.
It is unbelievably toxic.
Next level toxic.
You asked about my friend Melissa. So, spouses were very involved in like supporting the company. And so we met each other. And so, I became friends, and I met my friend Melissa. She started a writers group, and some of us met monthly at her house. So I became friends with her, and it was through that friendship. She never shared any issues that were bad. We didn't do that. We were good.
You weren't allowed. Yes.
Spouses. We weren't allowed to share anything. But at the end of 2019, she just disappeared right around the Christmas party time, and I knew something terrible had happened. Like, I just couldn't leave well enough alone, and so I channeled my inner Nancy Drew and realized that she was married to basically the person that was the succession plan to Dave, so Dave wouldn't have to be on the radio all the time and be able to retire at some point. And I realized through some digging that this guy that she was married to, a face of the company, I saw some really clear indication that he was cheating on her, and he was getting ready to go on a big book tour to represent the company. And we were like, well, what do we do with this information? Like, I can't. My friend has disappeared. She's not saying anything to me about anything, so nobody's gossiping to us. Right. And we get in trouble. We get in trouble if we say the wrong thing to the wrong person. You don't want to get this wrong. And so we just prayed about it for a really long time until finally Nathan brought it up to his boss. And then his boss brought it up, had already had some similar concerns. And we just were like, okay, if anything happens with Nathan's boss, he was like our canary in the coal mine. We'll know something is really wrong. And that guy just resigned. He resigned with nothing lined up. Like, one day he was just like, hey guys, I'm done. And and things spiraled from there. So the story, I go into it in many, many episodes in my podcast, but it was heartbreaking to see the way the company in the end had decided. We didn't realize, we thought if they know the truth, they'll do something, they'll do the right thing. But we realized they did know all along. And actually they were covering for the guy that was bringing them money at the expense of the abused spouse. because it was going to be too expensive for the Lampo Group, Ramsey Solutions, to actually figure out what was going on for real. Like they could have. They just believed this guy that came and said, my wife's crazy.
Well, it's so
Even
easy.
though,
Yeah.
yeah,
They created this sexist trope of crazy
yeah,
wife
yeah.
and, put it into the system from the
But
very
they, yeah,
beginning. And
they
so
did
it's,
bring in the end when
yeah.
Melissa did go to them and ask for help and say, this is what's happening. Um, they brought in, elders and people that knew them that said, yeah, he's been cheating on her. This is absolutely true. And they still decided that everything was in the past, and they decided that oral sex was actually not infidelity or adultery. That was not over the line. Um, and to move forward with their plan with him.
So they did have a policy, though, however, at Ramsey that you would be
Yeah.
fired for infidelity. Is that right?
Well, I mean, Dave has an article on the website, whether maybe he's taken it down now, and also talks about it in the Entre Leadership book that says, if your spouse can't trust you, I can't trust you. I mean, you can't, basically saying you can't work for me if you are not faithful to your spouse.
And yet, this was an exception they made, and you
Yeah.
wonder how many exceptions were made.
Well, it seems like the exceptions are made for people that have power
Yeah.
and influence. The exception wasn't made for the admin assistant who was single and got pregnant.
Right.
They fired her when they found out,
Mm-hmm.
citing their righteous living policy that she had not been living by that. But the same time they fired her, they were covering for Chris Hogan, who they knew had been cheating on his wife for decades. And was
Yeah.
still
So
working
the
there.
sexism, the double standards, the power dynamics, the just overall toxic culture,
Yeah.
in addition to laws being broken. Is it even legal to fire a woman for because she's pregnant? I don't think that's legal.
Yeah, and they would say they didn't because she was pregnant. They
Right.
fired her because she broke the rules about righteous living, which they wouldn't have known about if she wasn't pregnant. And, it begs the question of like, what happens with a guy? A guy could get away with this because there's no physical,
Evidence.
evidence that
Right.
he did anything. He has all sorts of wrong. It's all sorts of messed up. So that employment for my husband ended with him being brought into a board meeting because they knew he had some concerns, and him just saying, I think something's going on here and I am not comfortable with it. And they lied to him and basically said, it's not what you think it is. Some people aren't who you think they are, and they were insinuating that Melissa wasn't trustworthy. She had not told us anything at all, and said, you need to decide if you trust us or not. And if you don't trust us, you know what you need to do. And so Nathan did resign. And the next team meeting after he resigned, Dave told the whole team that some people had recently left. They were like rats leaving a ship with no sign of water. And
Rats.
they didn't, and then they lacked a backbone. He said, if you lack a backbone, don't have the ability, don't have the, aren't willing to come to me and talk to me, and you're willing to believe lies, blah, 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 blah. Fine. It's a good thing you're gone. Maybe you should be gone. We know this because we have a recording of the meeting
Yes, I know. I heard
that
that.
they say doesn't exist, that they claimed in another court hearing that they did not have recordings of these team meetings when they absolutely did have them, and they were on an internal drive that people accessed to hear about the meetings that they missed.
The amount of lies, the amount of, image management is just a kind way of putting it. False narrative
Yeah.
is also sugarcoating it a little bit. I mean, it just they're just lies. They're just
Yeah.
actually telling things that aren't true actively, publicly. And an organization that's, marketing itself as moral, godly, Christian based. And once you get in there, you realize all of the stuff, right? And so, I
Yeah.
think that like interesting what you said before. We talk about a lot in this whole unpacking of toxic workplaces or
Yeah.
toxic faith spaces, and in your case, both. Our autonomic nervous systems often pick up on the danger signs like our bodies do before our brains do. And I think you kind of
Oh,
mentioned
yeah.
that a little bit in your story. I personally, when I've heard Dave Ramsey speak, my body just picks up on all kinds of stuff. But even just like I've written down words and been like, these words aren't good. Like, these are terrible words. Like, it's not, it's how he's saying it. It's what he's saying. It's like, he's a very abusive person in his, like, the vibe that he gives off. And I just wonder if people listening, like at his big conferences or even in his workplace, if some of that is sort of these sort of like, I don't know, trauma bonding things that happen, or, like people who've had something familiar in their past, that something about it feels familiar. And so you kind of go along with it sometimes, but everybody's like probably fawning because of trauma, right? Or
Yeah,
how
I
was your
think part
experience
of
with
it
that?
is
Yeah.
that there's a couple different versions of Dave Ramsey.
Oh,
There's
there always
the
is. Yeah.
pastoral version of Dave.
Got it.
And then there's the radio version, like the radio
Mm-hmm.
Dave. And then there is the Dave who's speaking in conferences. And there's
Right.
the Dave that's speaking at your church, as opposed to the Dave that's speaking at the Global Leadership Summit or at
Uh-huh.
one of his big conferences. They aren't all the same Dave. And so if you're working for Dave and he's paying your salary, and you often are, every Monday they have like team meetings, and every Wednesday they have like either somebody internal or some local pastor will speak, like a church service type of thing, like a sermon.
At work.
And so sometimes you'll get to hear him share about his testimony, how God saved him, and how God's used FPU to help people find Jesus and help these single moms that were destitute to be able to pay their bills. And it will be like this super emotional, like, pull and tug at your heartstrings, like, this is real. Like, this is the real Dave, right? Like, I know his real heart. And so when I hear people say, or I hear Dave be really obnoxious and prideful and arrogant and rude on the radio, I think, oh, that's just Dave, but I know who he really is. Like, we've seen
Mm-hmm.
him behind the scenes. Like, not everybody knows all these really good things that he does, because he can't. Like, if he told everybody, he'd be, bragging about it. Well, I would argue he's very upfront about the things that he does, and was not happy when they did a big debt pay down of people and it did not get the press that they hoped it would get. It was overwhelmed by
Oh.
other press, like internal people internally in the company told us later that, like, leaders at Ramsey were really upset that it did not get picked up as much as they hoped it would. And so there's these different versions. And I think we
Yeah.
all know people that are like, oh, but I know their heart. I know their
Mm-hmm.
heart.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's that fawn response or if it's just I really know who they are. And I'm hoping
Mm.
that the obnoxious part that lets itself be seen every once in a while will, like, stop. Or somebody will, like, at some point, somebody basically took away the keys to Dave's Twitter. I don't know how they did that. I think somebody in like 2013-ish said, maybe don't fight people on Twitter. It's not a good look. We'll do that differently. Like, he can be, and so he's not as upfront,
He's got a lot of
obnoxious.
codependence around him, it sounds like. I mean, he
Yeah,
sounds very, I
yeah,
mean, I can't diagnose anyone. I don't have that kind of degree or ability. But when we understand
yeah,
narcissism, I mean, narcissism
yeah,
very much, they have multiple sides. And then they tend to have enablers, codependents around them, taking their Twitter away
yeah,
and be like, we need to show your good side. But it's like
yeah.
they don't want to acknowledge what is very toxic and obviously hurting people. So I know that I saw recently in the news there was something about like timeshares, and there's all kinds of stuff
Yeah,
still going on. I mean, legally, there's still issues happening. You're not the only whistleblower in this organization. What is
right.
kind of your understanding now that you're out of it at this point, and what's the kind of current thing?
Yeah, there are several different lawsuits that are ongoing. And one is the gal I mentioned earlier that was fired because they say that she broke the righteous living clause. So they found out she was pregnant because she told them when asking for FMLA leave. And so she lost her job. So they are in the middle of a lawsuit because she has sued them. We're waiting to hear from a judge on what happens next because Ramsey has filed for summary judgment. I do not think the judge is going to be like, oh, yes, we all agree on everything, so I'll just do a summary judgment. That does not seem to be the case. But a recent class action lawsuit was filed against Dave, and it had to do with customers of Timeshare Exit Team. And Timeshare Exit Team was a huge sponsor of the show. Dave was very vocal on the show about how they would help people get out of their timeshares. And he also talked about how they got so much business because of him.
Yeah.
It looks like what happened was these guys didn't have any extra special knowledge about getting people out of timeshares. Is they took a lot of people's money, and in many cases they were not able to get people out of timeshares. They just told some people to stop paying for their timeshares. There were a lot of people that gave money to Timeshare Exit Team because they trusted Dave's endorsement.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave continued to endorse the company even after he was hearing from fans of his saying, hey, we're not being served by these people. They're not getting back to us. We're not getting out of our timeshares. And he continued to endorse them as long as Timeshare Exit Team was giving Dave money for advertising dollars. The only time he stopped endorsing them is when they no longer had the money to give him.
Oh, interesting.
For
That
that.
seems to be the
Even though
pattern,
he
right?
knew there was a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of like
And
he
Dave
knows
said the
problems.
problem was they just had too much business. They grew too fast, too quickly. And so we were trying to work with them, Dave says, to
Yeah.
help them have better customer service. It does not seem to be just the
No.
fact that they weren't able to keep up with customers. They weren't able to deliver on what they promised. And so it'll be interesting to
Yeah.
see what happens, because people really believed that endorsement. And like, was Dave following all the rules, the FTC rules, and like disclosing why he was endorsing them? Was it a personal endorsement? Was it a commercial? How clear was he on the whole thing? It'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see what
It
happens with
will,
that.
but it's
I
just one
think
of the
they named
other.
Dave personally in that, as well as the company in that
Yeah,
lawsuit.
they did. It'll be interesting because, I mean, it's just one more piece of evidence that shows we really, hopefully, can start learning to not blindly trust faith leaders, faith/business leaders who just say, I don't want to hear negative things. Just trust me. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
That's just not it. It's not wise. The Bible would never tell us to do that, to blindly trust a human leader and have no accountability. So on this end of it, your podcast is, about untangling faith, and you have held on to your faith through this, but it, looks sort of different now based on what you've gone through. Speak to that person right now listening that just feels like, wow, this whole thing is just a sham. I don't even know if I can trust any faith institutions. Institutions just protect themselves. What's right about that? And do you resonate with that? And kind of how have you walked through it, untangling your own faith?
I think one of the hardest things is I would love to be able to say this is uncommon and probably won't happen to you, and it probably won't happen again. But I don't think that's I don't think it's an honest representation. I think institutions protect themselves because they're run by humans. And if we believe what the Bible says, that we have a sin nature, even Christians have a sin nature, even though we have Jesus. And not everybody who claims to represent Jesus and claims to follow Jesus is a follower of Jesus. And so when you have that sort of combination happening, those people are running these organizations. They are going to be fallible. And so we are always going to need to hold that tension, which is the worst thing. I think that is the thing. I just want to sit next to you and say, it sucks. And I hate for you that you have to see through this lens, that you have had to take this pill that you did not want to take to begin with, but was forced down your throat. And now you see the world differently and you can't go back. There's just no going back. So I want to say, I will sit next to you in the church potluck. I will sit next to you eating the best dessert that, Sally brings every time. Her banana pudding or whatever it is. And I will sit with you and say, I also don't know if I should become a member of the church. I also know that I want to stay and contend for the goodness of our faith organizations, but I do not know how much I can take. And I think it's okay to not give allegiance to an institution.
Yeah.
Permission granted to never be a member of a church again. Permission granted. I think there's something really wonderful about being in community with fellow believers. But I am not going to tell you that that has to happen in the way that it has traditionally looked in the past. I think we learn theology best in community. I think we are held up best in community. But if that, I don't think the only community that is available is in necessarily like the Baptist church on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just say, I'm really sorry. I wish I could say it's all, this is a one-off. I wish I could, but I am still sitting in that tension too of being like, I didn't ask for that. This isn't my dream. This isn't what I wanted. I wanted to be comfortable in this world. I wanted to be comfortable in the Christian institutional world. I grew up being really comfortable in it, and I'm not anymore. And there's just this dissonance, and it's sad, right? But I don't want to live like naive either.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if that gives hope or not. I do know that there are good people out there, good leaders of different churches, and it may be a denomination or a community you would have tried before because you were afraid that they were like down the slippery slope of like bad theology or bad
Right.
whatever.
The
Um,
liberals.
the slippery slope, we're all part of the slippery slope club here. Um, I'm just going to trust that Jesus is going to hang on to us, and that really what really matters will like float to the top, and the things that don't will fall away, and that we will find community that is like gives us space to say, I don't even know what I think of church. And I hope you find a pastor, if that's what you want, that says, I get it. I'm okay with it. In fact, I dig it that you are here. And I'm so glad. And I don't care if you're a member. I don't
Yeah.
care if you ever give tithe money to a capital campaign.
Yeah.
I just want you to know Jesus loves you. And we love you.
Yeah.
And did that answer your question? I don't know. I have some
It
deep,
did. No, it's
big
beautiful.
thoughts about, I have some big feelings about the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, because of your experience, all you've
Yeah.
seen and done, when you've gone that deep and been behind the scenes and seen what happened to you and your husband and your friend and this woman who was fired for being pregnant and just one thing after another.
Yeah.
And then the stories that have come to you, even just like the whole Bill Gothard
Yeah.
situation. It's just everywhere, all over evangelicalism. There's so much toxicity. So thank you for expressing that in such a beautiful way. I know it probably touched a lot of people, whether people have a Christian background or not. I think when you're in a faith organization or have been a part of faith institutions, whether you're a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu or a Buddhist, any of our institutions can become toxic because
Yeah.
people make not just mistakes, but people can go down entire systems of
Yeah.
building toxic places that oppress and use their power over people in ways that harm a lot of us. And so thank you for unpacking that. I know a lot of people resonated with it. I really appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing your story today. I do once again want to point people to your podcast because you go way more in depth on all of these things and walk
Thank
through
you.
it kind of in real time and a lot of it going on. And so thank you for that. Also, I want to you're going to hang out with us for one more question here. We're going to
Yep.
close off this and then we're going to talk to our Patreon supporters. And I want to get your perspective more on some of the recent stuff that's happened, even with like abuse in the Southern Baptist Convention. I know you're right there in Nashville where Lifeway headquarters is, and there's
Yeah.
probably have a lot of crossover there. So we're going to talk about that, but let people know where they can find you and if they want to reach out to you and have any further, questions about some of the stuff you said.
Yeah, I'm ridiculously easy to find online. So if you just search for Untangled Faith, you'll find me. So if you listen to podcasts, if you just look for the Untangled Faith podcast, you will find me. I have a website, untangledfaithpodcast.com. That is me. And I'm on Instagram as Untangled Faith. I'm Faith Untangled on Twitter or whatever it's being called now. I'm having all the feelings about Elon Musk and Twitter, but I'm also on Threads. So if you look for Amy Fritz and Untangled Faith, you will find me. I'm ridiculously easy to find.
Awesome. Yes. Reach out to Amy if you have any further questions or just want to know what it was like to be a wife of somebody who worked in a toxic environment, what it's like to be a whistleblower. She's had a lot of experience and supported a lot of people.
Yeah.
So thanks for being on the show today, Amy. I really appreciate you and the work that you do. And I'm looking forward to us being together at Podcast Movement in
Yes.
Denver. So if you're a
We're gonna be
podcast host
roomies.
and you're going to be there, yeah, that's right. If you're going to be at Podcast Movement in Denver, look for Amy and me. We'll be walking around going to all the different breakout sessions, and we'd like to meet you.
Yes. Thank you, Lori. This has been fun.
This has been fun. Well, Amy certainly gave us a lot to think about. She has thought very deeply about what she has walked through herself, what her friend Melissa walked through, what her husband walked through, and many others that she knows that have been in that particular environment. But not only that, this has opened her up to the conversation around toxic workplace environments and even just toxic faith communities. And I really hope that something she said today may have opened your eyes, whether it was the concept around betrayal blindness, where it was maybe you've had an experience where you have been labeled the crazy wife, either in a ministry setting or some, faith-based work settings. This is just such an inappropriate concept. It's such a hugely stereotypical and a negative stereotype that there are women who are trying to bring good men down for whatever reason. We want people to call out what is not right among us, whether that's a woman or a man. And in many cases, it may just be that women who are on the margins or who are socialized differently are often seeing things that are wrong and wanting to bring change and fix those and make them better. But these are not the voices we want to silence or shun in any way. And so I'm grateful for Amy and her whistleblowing, but also the way that she's been supportive of whistleblowers, as well as trying to help support those who are walking through the difficult journey of both whistleblowing, speaking out to the press, starting a podcast, or just getting on Twitter and sharing one's perspective. And so grateful that she was on today. I hope that if any of you have found this helpful, that you'll reach out to her for more information or for more support. And that any of you, if you're in a situation where you're starting to wake up from betrayal blindness, would love to talk to you about that. Always reach out. You can reach out to me on Twitter, Threads, Instagram, wherever is most convenient for you. And of course, as always, you could join our Difference Maker community where we go a little deeper into all these episodes. And we definitely do that with Amy. After this, we'll be talking with her a little more about her perspective on what's going on with the Southern Baptist Convention, abuse cases there, whistleblower situations there. And of course, she lives in Nashville, right there where the Lifeway headquarters is, which is the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so she's right there in the middle of all that and has some really good insight into some of this, and is her heart is just to help people flourish. So it was great to have her on today. Once again, if you're at Podcast Movement in Denver in August, please reach out and say hi ahead of time, and we'll try to have coffee or grab a meal together, or maybe we'll be in a breakout session together. Either way, love supporting other fellow podcasters out there. Podcasting is such a great way to make changes in the world, raise awareness, have thoughtful conversations like this one, and make a difference. Wherever you are, wherever in the world, I'm grateful for you for listening, for engaging in these conversations. And I hope you are staying emotionally healthy, or at least growing toward emotional health through these conversations. Keep making a difference wherever you are. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper, and then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.